continue with this. We will see those laps. This is a big waterfall. After that we will proceed like this, going to P3, going on one side, on the other, as you see here. And entrance second, parking number 2. So it's important to not stop, to rest a little bit and wait us to come back. It will not happen. So just continue by the road and we will go in the entrance 2. Starting here, finishing on the other side.
在回 Sarajevo 的路上，到的在一个好漂亮的 waterfall。
This is the map of Sarajevo. What is interesting is that this map was the original map was made for the Olympic Games. So you probably heard of the 1984 Winter Olympic Games. Essentially, it was the first Olympic Games hosted by a socialist country. It was really the high point of development of Sarajevo, because at that time, of course, you know about the Cold War. So NATO forces, Western allies were against the Eastern Bloc countries and the Soviet Union. And whenever there was supposed to be Olympic Games, there was always like tensions. So the people, you know, countries from the Western part didn't really want to go to the Eastern part, and vice versa. They didn't want to go to the countries which would host, who were, for example, in the West, like USA. So what was Sarajevo would later be used, like today, for explaining the war. So not even a decade had passed, 8 years only after the Olympic Games in 1984, when war broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So to give you a bit of a background, Bosnia and Herzegovina was part of a socialist federalist republic of Yugoslavia. In the early 90s, significant changes happened. So significant geopolitical changes. First of all, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Besides that, of course, they had a huge impact on Yugoslavia, since Soviet Union was the principal communist country in the world. And after the fall of the Soviet Union and of the fall of the Eastern Bloc, Yugoslavia was the only one left with this kind of how to say, like social kind of ruling, socialism, exactly.
Yeah.
So in the early 90s, first democratic elections happened throughout Yugoslavia, in all of its republics. So Yugoslavia consisted of 6 constituent republics, Bosnia being one of them, and each one held democratic elections, and by and large nationalist parties won. What was interesting about Bosnia was that it was really a multi-ethnic country. Yugoslavia as a whole was multi-ethnic, but Bosnia especially. Bosnia was called Little Yugoslavia because we had both Muslims or Bosniaks, Serbs and Croats living here in significant numbers. So when these elections happened, these nationalist parties decided to cooperate. However, not much time has passed and there were misunderstandings. So basically, there was a referendum in 1992. Bosniaks and Croats were for referendum and they were for independence, because previously Slovenia and Croatia and Macedonia also, they all declared independence and seceded from Yugoslavia. So in Bosnia, Bosniaks or Muslims and Croats were also for that. However, Serbs were against that because they would be left as a minority in this new country. So the referendum was held on the 1st March, 29th February and 1st March of 1992. Most people voted yes, but most of the Serbs boycotted these elections. Not long after that, on the 6th of April, war started in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sarajevo was besieged. So you see on the map, this red line signifies the siege of Sarajevo. So there was this ring long approximately 65 kilometers, and there was soldiers of the enemy army, of the Republic of Serbs army. They were of course very well equipped and they besieged the whole of the city. Previously I mentioned the Olympics, so we have many mountains around the city. You can even see these Olympic rings. So Igman, Bjelašnica, Trebević and Jahorna over there. These were all Olympic mountains. The sad fact is that in the war they would all be used, most of them, for besieging the city. Only Igman was still free. So at the beginning of the war, Sarajevo found itself in a very tough situation because it was basically cut off from the rest of the country. Nothing could be, imported into the city. And what happened soon after the start of the war in the summer of '92 was that United Nations decided to take the airport. So they took the airport and they used it to provide humanitarian help to the city. However, that help was kind of not too good, to say the least. Why do I say that? Well, much of the food that people of Sarajevo got was from Second World War. So some of that was used for the war in Vietnam, for example, and they simply kept that and gave it to us. So there was this ikar beef, famous ikar beef. We have a statue to it in the city. It was so bad that even dogs who were kind of, starving, they didn't want to eat it. It was so bad. So Sarajevo was really starving at that point. They were getting some help, but it was very limited. So the only way to cross out of the city and onto the free territory was across the airport. Even though United Nations controlled the airport, you can see this ring over here. So the enemy forces were very close, and whoever tried to cross over risked their lives. Basically, it was like a suicide attempt. Despite
Nobody got out.
So despite that, some people did try, and between the beginning of war and the construction of the tunnel, many people tried to cross. Some did, some people were successful, but many died. No one knows for sure, but it's estimated that more than 500 people were killed trying to cross the airport and trying to reach the free zone. So mostly it was done during the night because it's more safer, it's harder to see when someone is crossing when it's night. But despite that, it was very dangerous. So people of Sarajevo thought, okay, if we can't go across it, could we go underneath it? And that's how the idea of the tunnel was born. So basically the tunnel was constructed in this area here. It would cross underneath the airport. It would go from Butmir, so this part here, area of Sarajevo, is called Butmir, and it would reach Dobrinja. Dobrinja is the area of Sarajevo right across the airport. So works were convened on both sides, so both from this place here and in Dobrinja area. It was very hard for people to dig this tunnel because city was under siege, of course, and food was scarce. The tools that they used were very basic tools, so basic shovels and picks. There were multiple problems logistically, so water would kind of, underground water would come up and people would have to take it out. There weren't any modern pumps for taking out the water, so they would have to do it by hand. Also, for taking out the land, they would have to use basic wheelbarrows. So work was done constantly for 4 months, so roughly from March until July of '93. Work was done continuously, so 24 hours non-stop. There were 3 shifts, each lasted for 8 hours. And since because of the specific situation in the city, workers were paid with cigarettes, because in Sarajevo it was almost like Middle Ages at that point. People didn't have much use of money, but they used cigarettes and other stuff for bartering, so they would exchange goods for goods, not really modern economic system, but like something like feudal system at that point. Of course, the prices in the city were astronomical. So for example, due to shortage of goods, meat, 1 kilogram of meat was something like 150 marks. So that's like 75 euros. A kilogram of sugar was like 25 euros. And most of the foods was something like that. So very, very, very tough situation. So tunnel was really, really needed for this.
哎呦，有点下去。
go in.
This tunnel, how many people can live inside?
Plenty
through
of
the
people,
way.
we can all go at the same time. So, yeah, it's safe now. So, if some of you want.
就电影里边的内容。
都是电影里面。
但是呢，它这个就比电影更形象化。我当初用的是更惨的。
I promise to you, this is the entrance of replica. Exit is 100 meters.
Different materials were used in different parts. So in this area, Butmir area, wood was used because Mountain Igman is very close and there was a lot of trees here. So wood was not a problem here. However, in the Dobrinja area, which was inside the besieged city of Sarajevo, they used metal construction. The reason being that winter of 92-93 was so harsh that wood was in kind of low supply. So, you know, regular trees in parks across the city were all cut down because people didn't have wood to keep them warm. So also other stuff like electricity. The main post office was bombarded, so there was no electricity, no telecommunications, no water in households. So people had to go, there was like a big truck with water and they would cross through the city. People would have to carry big bottles of water and you know, take some water and go back to their homes. So really not a pleasant situation. So the Tunnel of Hope really made a huge difference. After its construction, tons of food, tons of medical equipment, weaponry was transported through this tunnel. At first it was very tough to go through it because of the underground waters. However, over time it was improved. So there were rails and like a wagon which you could push. At first, basic lamps, homemade lamps were used. Then a bit later, more modern electricity was introduced. So electric cable was installed so that city could have electricity. Cable for oil was also installed so people would have oil, and so on. You'll see, we will go through it a bit later, but it's not really pleasant to go through it. For example, I wasn't born during the war, only after the war, but my parents were and my brother. So my father crossed through this tunnel and you know, he said he really couldn't get much air in it, and you know, you had to carry a big backpack with you to carry some foods to your family. It was very low, so the tunnel is something like 800 meters long, roughly 1 meter wide and 1.5 to 1.8 meters high. So very low, at some points 1.5 meters. So
you're skinny.
yeah, you really